Good evening, everyone. Greetings from Tibet House. Uh, I hope you are all you have all rejuvenated after the refreshing tea break. And thank you all for making it to the end of this session. So this is the closing session, and we have Arka Singh as our chairperson, and we have Ramanji and Rinan Shah as our distinguished speaker. And for this session, Ramanji is not able to join us because of his health complications. So he has left his video for us. So I hope you all gain some knowledge through that video. So I would like to request Miss Arka Singh, Dr. Raman Kumar, and Dr. Rinan Shah to come up on stage and take your respective seats. Thank you. So let me introduce our chairperson, Ms. Arkaja Singh. Ms. Arkaja Singh is a fellow at the Council for Energy, Environment and Water as a fellow. Her work focuses on the interface of law, institutions and regulation. She is interested in the governance of transforming cities, inclusive development, land and natural resources, and the management of informal economies. She trained as a lawyer and has 20 years' experience in research and advisory work in the interface of law, governance, and public institutions. Her recent work includes research studies of regulatory governance, informal settlements, and the Indian Smart City Mission. She has led and participated in a number of consulting projects in urban and social development. In a previous sanitation project, she was responsible for managing research on institutions and finance, social interface of technology and engineering, and on social and gender dynamics of sanitation. Arkaji studied law at the National Law School of India, University, Bangalore, and has a LLM from the School of Oriental and African Studies, London. She has been a fellow at the Center for Policy Research, and prior to that, she was a consultant at ICF International. So without taking much time, over to you, Ms. Arkaji. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So, in this session, which is titled, which is, I think, the most open-ended, perhaps, of the sessions that we'll have today, and, maybe something to kind of help us sort of assimilate and talk about and think about some of the things that have, the very substantial things that have preceded us, and hopefully, So this is in some ways, taking us to a different scale and taking us to, some slightly different perspectives of thinking about similar issues. And in this session, what I'm hoping we'll do, and in the way that it's organized, is consider some of the kind of separations and divides between the technocratic spaces, the space of human rights, and what would broadly be considered civil society, but which I will, which I'm thinking of in a narrower frame as civil society that's engaged in ethical and cultural engagements around ecology. And these are all all of this and much more are, we have in this room today and in the course of the day, so many different specialized technical domains in conversation with each other, but not always. Those conversations are difficult ones. And the one thing that we haven't engaged so much with today is the technocratic space, the space of the space of governance and projects and plans and engineering and high infrastructure, and that and the discourse of high infrastructure, which exists in its own in its own sphere with its own rationalities, and it's quite difficult from other domains to productively engage with the isolation of the technocratic sphere. But the nature of the crisis that we face today makes this isolation untenable. and what are the ways to to open up and to engage with that technocratic space. And in that, one of the challenges is what would be the the conceit of engineering and the idea that it can always provide a solution. We've had much of that discourse around dams and around big infrastructure, around the Char Dham projects. It's in everyday water supply and sanitation technologies, we don't question those conceits enough. And when you actually get to the ground on on those kind of in the sphere of engineering, you realize quite a lot has not been thought about, quite a lot which is kind of unthinkingly reproduced in plans and projects and strategies and schemes is based on very shaky assumptions and very limited understanding of social practice and cultural practice. And so it's a space that has not been engaged with enough. This is something I encountered in my work on urban sanitation, but it's something that we and it provided me a perspective of thinking about engineering as something that should be much less sure of itself than it presents itself to be. There's also the global and national scale of the climate change discourse, which also makes it particularly difficult to engage with when your issues are local and your concerns are local and when your position is local. And the strategies and action plans of climate planning, climate action plans, heat action plans, and resilience plans. It happens at a level and at a level of abstraction and using planning methodologies and analytical tools, which again seem to assume a kind of certainty, but without considering enough some of its kind of without considering enough how you could perhaps do this in a much better way by planning from a local space. And to give you an example of what I'm talking about is we had recently this heat wave, and there was a lot of conversation around heat waves and heat action planning. We also have a seasonality now to how public discourse engages with heat. So we had the heat season, now we'll have the flood and landslide season, and then we are soon going to head into the air quality season. And there's a cycle that almost repeats itself every year, and then maybe you'll have a window of a few months to prepare for the next set of seasons. But in this conversation around heat action plans and all the cities that need to have heat action plans and air quality plans, there is actually so little of knowledge from other domains and other discourses that actually can even get assimilated into the planning processes the way that they're built now. And to give an example of that is, so two of the major kind of long-term strategies, heat action plans have a response space, which is how do you deal with people so that they don't die, and how do you make sure that they get to hospitals or shelters and things like that, and school timings, and that's almost universal to every place. But also, what are the medium and long-term actions? Most of those are about water bodies and green cover. Now, water bodies, you can't do much about. What you have, and maybe you can stop those from getting destroyed, but you can't do much about the ones that are already gone. Green cover is something you could you could do things with. But the difference between maybe different kinds of trees, or between old trees and new trees, they in the technocratic discourse, you'll say nature-based solutions and tree canopies, but you're still not able to consider the difference of different kinds of trees, and what it would take to plant differently or plan differently around and understand what is already there and build around what is already there. So that kind of understanding can come from local spaces, but that interface more or less doesn't exist unless that gets forced into place, unless there's enough of a voice and enough to push open those doors which are presently closed to all of this kind of knowledge and also ethical engagements. Another aspect of this is we talked in the earlier session, there was the kind of the dogma around population, and there are a few of these that that kind of exist in kind of public imagination. And one of the ones that is the thing about turning back the clock. Uh, whether it's in the domain of environmental protection, the rejuvenation of rivers, in a lot of these spaces we get stuck in these kind of cul-de-sacs of thinking around turning back the clock and restoring to some kind of idealized pristine past, which and there's of course the kind of the problem, and I think Suresh brought this up in his presentation about about how it's maybe even unscientific to understand the past in that way. But coming from where I do, we also have a particular kind of legal administrative problem in India of being able to recognize a lot of things. So a lot of development that might have happened outside of whatever kind of insufficient legal frameworks of development, we are unable to recognize that, ratify it, and then work around or with what we have. So we get stuck in a kind of, either we get stuck with violent solutions, the demolitions of riverside settlements, and this violent displacements and evictions which happen in the name of Miyawaki forests and river, the new thing, but also river restoration, or, cleaning up, and, it used to be anti-pollution, and it used to be right to a clean environment. That used to be the kind of the rationality in which these violent displacements happened. And now it's just small shifts in the rationality, but it's a very similar idea that you can that to restore you have to turn back the clock. And is that the only possible solution? Is that the best solution? And should you be able to work on solutions for which you don't have to consider its costs and its impacts in something that brings the social and ecological together? The separation between social and ecological, and being able to think of ecological in a separate way. When we had this there was a conversation with some engineers recently, and they said, no, but the Supreme Court has ordered that those people should be removed from there. And of course, the Supreme Court will always order that those people should be removed. But is that the only way to think of even law, or even in law, is that the only way to think of their claims? And from from engineering and from the natural sciences, is that necessarily the only possible solution that you could have had to those kind of situations? But I think we have to really kind of challenge, even within within NGO discourse and within civil society circles, the notion that you can turn back the clock. So ecological action has to exist with the clarity that you cannot turn back the clock, but that you might have to work in where you are, where you are finally. So yeah, with this, I'll just introduce briefly our two speakers for today. There's Dr. Raman Kumar, who is unfortunately not here today, but who has sent a pre-recorded lecture, so we'll play that first. Dr. Raman Kumar is a scientist who studies how changes in the environment caused by human activities affect wildlife, particularly birds. He has a PhD in ecology from the Center for Wildlife Studies and an MSc in forestry from the Forest Research Institute, Dehradun. Raman is a guest faculty at several Indian universities. Most of his research is focused on woodpeckers in sal forests of sub-Himalaya. He is closely involved in environmental education, particularly through citizen science programs that encourage ordinary people, particularly school children, to take on the role of scientists to observe and monitor nature. He and his colleagues at Nature Science Initiative have been working to create awareness about nature among people through nature walks, workshops, and by producing relevant awareness material, including books. And I should mention that I have been often a beneficiary of some of the nature education and the kind of sociality around nature education that Dr. Raman Kumar and his partner, Dr. Soumya Prasad, have put together from time to time. Our second speaker today is Dr. Rinan Shah, who is the co-founder of Reading Himalaya and a postdoctoral fellow at the Lakshmi Mittal and Family South Asia Institute, Harvard University. She works on water, environment and development and sustainability studies with a focus on mountains, governance, policy, institutions and urban issues. She's a contributing author to the International Panel on Climate Change, AR4 report. She has worked across academia, research and implementation, and her work has been published in national and international journals. Reading Himalaya is a research and policy consultancy focused on society development and capacity in the eastern Himalayan regions of Sikkim and northern West Bengal, which includes Darjeeling and Kalimpong. Reading Himalaya is an all-women-led organization co-founded by Dr. Mona Chhetri, Dr. Anisa Bhutia, and Dr. Rinan Shah. All three of us hail from the Sikkim Darjeeling Himalaya and having lived, studied, and worked extensively as researchers in and on the Eastern Himalaya, we are well attuned to the education, research, and unemployment landscape in the region. With a decade-long experience in research and policy, with training from reputed national, that's TIS A3 St. Xavier's, and international institutions so as Brown University, King's College London, Aarhus University, Harvard University, and University of Western Austria. So over to, I think we'll first have Dr. Raman Kumar's pre-recorded talk, and then we'll have Dr. Rinan Shah.
Hello everyone. My name is Raman Kumar, and I and my colleague Soumya Prasad, we are part of this organization called Nature Science Initiative. We both have a background in ecology, a very academic kind of background with lots of research. So we both did our PhDs on ecology and then went on to pursue academic careers in this field and also university teaching. Now, during the course of our research, we spent a lot of time in nature trying to look at ecological issues and answering problems in ecology. At some point, we realized that while we are doing good quality research, and we also had an interest in conservation, whatever we were doing is somehow not percolating to the ground. And we felt there was a big gulf between science and its application. So that got us thinking, and that's how we diverged into the field of education, and particularly nature and environment education. So apart from research now, we have been recently doing a lot of focus on environment education, particularly with school children. And now I'll share our journey with you. So at Nature Science Initiative, we started off as a team of ecologists pursuing academic careers and doing field research on various topics in ecology, ranging from birds to studying seed dispersal and climate change. It was natural for us to have an interest in conservation. An interesting episode happened when during our field projects, we were working in the middle of the forest when one of our field assistants asked this question that you do so much hard work, such complex research, but what's the point in doing this kind of work? Because we don't understand what you're doing, and I want to know how your research will help the common person. That was a very interesting question, and it started to bother us, and we delved further and explored and found that there is a huge gap between scientific research, however well intended it may be, and its application on the ground, which seldom sees the grassroots. Talking about environment education and sensitivity to nature. We researched and found that there is a huge body of literature which suggests that uh, people who are sensitive to nature and positive towards conservation, the main influencing factors for them are their early life experiences in nature. Another factor is their education in school and exposure to nature during their school days. Uh, Also, the fact that they have been given enough opportunities to observe nature during growing up. And finally, whether they have been learning by practice rather than learning by rote. Now, psychologists have also researched this and found that children who have an early exposure to nature are much better at critical thinking than their peers. And as adults, they are mentally also much healthier than those who are not exposed to nature early in life. So, with this background, we know that there is a felt gap between praxis and pedagogy in the generic sense. But when we talk of this gap with particular reference to nature education, there are certain issues which need to be discussed. The first one probably is that the children cannot relate to the content which is taught to them during environment education. For example, they are taught about giraffes in savanna ecosystems in Africa. Uh, that's something which is non-evident to them and something which is really far off. They can't see it or perceive it. The examples that are quoted in environment education curricula are largely disconnected from the local context. So that means children are unable to see examples of, from their local surroundings. Also, environment education as it is imparted is devoid of experience. So it's largely, classroom exercise. Children are seldom taken out to experience nature in nature. Looking at the reasons behind this gap, there are two main reasons that we think affect this gap. Firstly, the first one is related to the teaching materials. So firstly, there is a lack of adequate teaching materials, particularly in vernacular, including Hindi. Much of the existing materials for environment education is dry and uninteresting, and it fails to trigger curiosity in children, which is really important. In some cases, the facts and examples that are provided are also inaccurate. The other main issue with this gap is the limitation in the teaching capabilities. Most of the educators involved in environment and nature education don't have the experience. One reason is that environment education is treated as a second-rate subject, not taken seriously or considered just as an extra period. Also, since environment and nature education is meant to be practiced in field outdoors, most of the educators lack ideas of teaching by demonstration in nature. So that is another gap. Now, how to bridge this gap? So one idea would be to improve the materials and resources available for teaching. Make the materials simplified and interesting so that the children's curiosity gets motivated. It should have strong local and regional contexts where children can relate to their immediate surroundings. And the material has to be also presented in vernacular so that it's easy to grasp. Rather than being fact-based or information-based, focus should be made on making the material concept-based. There's no substitute for experience. So first-hand observations in natural surroundings and wilderness is a very, very important factor to be included. Regarding how to enhance the educator's capacity, the teaching aids should be improved. The teachers should be oriented and trained. The curricula, lesson plans, and modules should be provided. And now we started this experiment called Nature Vidya to, as part of our efforts to improve environment education delivery to school children. So it's been our endeavor to try and produce appropriate resource materials, develop regular teaching modules which are linked to existing curricula to make it easier for teachers to impart environment education. As far as possible, include local contexts and examples in these activities. Stress on direct observation, spending a lot of time outdoors and learning by seeing. Continuous engagements with schools rather than being, just one-off activities. And we have also been trying to link up these initiatives in schools with existing global and national environment programs so that the children develop a sense of ownership and belonging. So as part of our efforts, we have been producing a lot of materials, including storybooks, which are trying to explain complex ecological phenomena in a very simple and very interesting way, a fun way. We also have a series of educational posters and on various topics related to nature and environment. And we make it a point to make our material bilingual so that it is equally effective in both rural and urban scenarios. We've been organizing events, for example, on special occasion like Environment Day. Then we've also been linking up with global events like Great Backyard Bird Count, World Nature Watch, and so on. This we feel is a good strategy and it provides a periodic motivation. And other than these episodic events, or pulse events as we call them, we also engage with children continuously through a sequence of activities which are planned according to seasons, and they have a strong focus on learning outdoors by observation. So, this approach, which has been going on since almost 10 years, has largely succeeded, I think. We've covered nearly 200 schools in Uttarakhand, reached out to over 25,000 children, over 9 districts of Uttarakhand, and established education centers and activity centers in certain parts. And we also have been able to activate nature clubs in many of these schools. So this has been our journey, and we continue to adapt and modify our programs based on real-time feedback. And as I told you, it's work in progress, and we welcome you to take a look at our Nature Vidya portal, and your comments, suggestions, criticisms are welcome. And thank you for your attention.
Am I visible to everybody? Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think I would like to present my presentation as somewhat of, with a certain sense of hope in terms of what we can do for the region itself. And I was just thinking about Dr. Raman's presentation and wondering if we had access to such materials when we were younger, would we have done environmental research much earlier than what we are doing right now? It is also reflective of where I am right now, because it was after years that I was able to engage with environmental research, environment policy. So when you have environmental research being carried out in the Eastern Himalaya, where I come from, so in a sense, when people come in, they would be like, "Oh, we've trekked through your forests, gone into all these national parks and gone into all these sanctuaries." But that is, in a way, we cannot echo those feelings, because we do not have that kind of relationship with the forests, where where you don't simply go into the forest for exploration and research. But nowadays we do. In a sense, our view of the region and forests or the natural resources are much more embedded is what I would like to believe. And in a sense, when we have research and policy and education happening in these regions, there are people who come in with a certain kind of quote unquote preconceived notions, which tries to look at the region in a very simplistic view, just a one dimensional view of the region. And many a times they do, with their simple sentences, they do away with a lot of struggles that the people might have been undergoing. uh, for example, when this one example which I would like to talk about always is how the communities only know of a project being implemented or a project being sanctioned when the trucks are rolling down the hills and coming into your villages. So there is a lot of there's a lag in information. There's also a lag in how policy gets trickled down, and also, of course, there is a lag between the two. Reading Himalaya is an independent research and policy initiative where we focus on Himalayan society, environment, development, and politics. As Arkaja already mentioned, we launched last year in 2023, and all of us come from the region, and we are an all women led organization. As my co-fellow at LMSA also said, that pahad aur pani kabhi अपने लिए नहीं काम करता, because it always flows out. So in a way, we also feel that we have flown out of the mountains, but we would like to, work with the region, because we have quite a long experience in terms of where we come from, but also in terms of research and other initiatives. For this presentation, I would like to premise on the need for on the need for an initiative which is more inclusive, also which overcomes disciplinary silos by looking at three aspects, that is research policy education, disciplinary silos, and regional research, and how we need to harness all these, not harness in a sense, but rethink how we are doing it, especially to understand the larger questions of the Himalaya. Uh, uh, in the Himalaya, we have, especially in the eastern Himalaya, which is also known as the biodiversity hotspot in terms of species richness and in terms of species numbers. But it either swings, so it's either largely natural sciences or largely social sciences. So in a way, when there are certain research areas which are the niche of one particular group and certain research areas of another, so we feel that there is not enough interdisciplinary research. And what it also happens is the same topics, for example, like disaster management, like Manshi mentioned in the morning, is looked at from one lens, and the same thing is repeated year in and year out. We also think that the research needs to be more rigorous and theoretically strengthened. Many a times it has happened that when we speak about the geology of the region, there are certain engineers, a lot of contractors, which would who even though from the region, but because they're educated in the larger grand narrative of how the mechanics of the land is, they there's a cut copy paste kind of implementation of the different projects that happen. So in a way, we also need to be more contextual of what is out there, especially while implementing back in the mountains. The policy, as we mentioned, is as we have been looking at, is more top down and most likely not inclusive of local knowledge and local participation, and there's rarely any follow through or impact. As an example, I would like to pick up springs, where I work. My large work is on water and water governance. Springs are the most important water resource of the entire Hindu Kush Himalayan region. However, and they are important groundwater resources, but springs have found their way into a national level dialogue, or not even into the water policy of the country only in the year 2018, where there was a couple of reports that came out of Niti Aayog, which looked at water security, which also looked at tourism, sustainable tourism. So that was when springs made its way into the national dialogues, and now since then there have been different initiatives on springs that have taken place, for example, like the Dhara Vikas Yojana, which happens in Sikkim, which has then been picked up and implemented in other towns and districts, on town hills and towns districts. Unfortunately, Darjeeling and Kalimpong they belong to a state which is largely a plain state. So the similar kind of policy that gets picked up by the hill states, because Sikkim itself has its own forest and water law, which does not which recognizes springs, but in no way, in probably in the last even as latest as 2020, the Central Groundwater Board, which makes a record of all the water sources in a particular state, has not recognized springs yet, and neither has the National Sample Survey, which looks at water resources around the world, around the country. Secondly, here also, again going back to the example of springs, we do have a lot of the upper image shows you of the underwater works of springs, where confined and unconfined aquifer, which are water storage units under the ground, create effects so that the spring emerges, which contributes to the discharge of springs, but also contributes to the base flow, which is the minimum flow of rivers across the mountains. So there have been studies on springs which looks at springs and spring shed by itself, but when the spring emerges on ground, it not only becomes a biophysical resource, it then becomes a very social resource, which has control rules, which has access rules, but the rent law in India, the rent law in India says that whatever lies under the ground is your property. So in a sense, it lies in this ambiguous space where you don't know how groundwater gets governed. So in this sense, we push for a need to understand how different how this natural resource access works through different kinds of interactions at the within environmental sciences, but also in terms of institutions and economics of the region. Moving on, regional research, I think it came up in the morning where we spoke about ICIMOD, and there are lots of institutions that do collaborative work across the mountains. Uh, but I think there is a more need for it, especially in terms of cooperation and collaboration, and especially transfer of the different kinds of initiatives. We have worked with Mansi before and understanding different aspects of disasters, but we would also like to see how we can draw from each other's knowledges. And yeah, the vision and mission, the Reading Himalaya represents the connection between research and praxis, as we are not only generating but also engaging in localized knowledge production that is relevant to the area and builds on local capacities. One of our primary focuses is on building local capacities. We're directly engaged in building the research capacity, primarily of the early career researchers and early graduates from the region, and generating outputs that are accessible to all. I shall present some of it in the coming slides. So we carry out our new research by ourselves, but we also are engaged in carry out project-based research, where we carry out the full project from creating baseline, writing, analysis to dissemination. We also work towards building the capacity of early career researchers through writing workshops or through analysis workshops and publications. This was our first policy series that we launched in March 2024. It looked at the Forest Conservation Amendment Act of 2023, which was passed in a haste by the Parliament last year, which was supposed to come into action in December 2023. So the FCA, as many of you would know, already will have significant impacts on the entire country, but also, of course, additionally, it also has impacts on the use of forests in the Northeast India. And in Sikkim and other states such as Arunachal, Manipur, and Meghalaya, where you have where the Forest Rights Act is not implemented, the imposition of a Forest Conservation Act will then lead to complications between what should they follow. Should they follow the rules of the state, or should they follow the rules of the center? And the policy also creates a lot of opens a lot of leeways for corporate land grabs. Not that it is already happening, but it does enable it more. The ease of doing business has not reduced at all, and also leads to the increase in felling and deforestation of native forests to be replaced by monoculture plantations, which is already underway. But with this Forest Conservation Amendment Act, we feel that it might intensify. I would, yeah. So in the mountains, when we speak to people, generally they say, who is the infrastructure developed for? And most of the times, the common response is the roads are either made for the military or the tourists, and never for the people. So in the similar sense, the Forest Conservation Act stated that any infrastructure would be developed within 100-kilometer distance from the international borders, and they were exempt from the purview of the Forest Conservation Act. So as you see in this image, 100-kilometer means a lot for the Sikkim and Darjeeling Himalaya, where the entire area is getting encompassed, which means the entire state is exempted from the is exempted from the purview of FCA, which would allow the creation of any kind of infrastructure, leading from linear infrastructure to ecotourism sites, zoos, etc. Secondly, we work on a publication series where we're exploring Eastern Himalaya from different aspects. This we do in collaboration with Rachna Publication based in Sikkim. Through this series, we strive to capture the dynamism of the people and place and politics of and in the region. We strive to showcase our ability to engage with wider thoughts and processes, to tell our stories ourselves. Our first inaugural volume had 9 essays from scholars of and in the region who are working on gender and other identities, and it included a variety of methods and conceptual frameworks where the authors engage with texts, normative practices, conceptual engagements, labor, disability, and sorceress women and public spaces. Currently, the team is working on a second issue where we're engaging with land, where we or not only engage with the biophysical aspect of land, but also looking at land from perspectives of urbanization, rurality, environment, gender, and literature. It is currently under production, and we hope to get it out by later this year. Finally, I would like to end with some of the way forward aspects where we are working in collaboration with youth from the region, as well as not newer organizations that are in the region, where we're looking at aspects of conservation, health, and water. Also looking especially at the status of women and politics, trying to look at the social security of women through labor and other informal markets, and also trying to build networks and collaborations with Himalaya across the region. Thank you.
So we were supposed to end the session by 5:30, but we are a little bit beyond that time. But I think we could take a few questions, and I think maybe we can go on for another 5 or 7 minutes. So since we have only one respondent to the questions, but yeah, please, are there any questions?
I'm Asim Gupta. How can the situation be turned around? How can the public be involved in for the conservation of the Himalayan ecology system?
Let's see if there are any more. Are there any more questions, or should I ask? Yes, please go ahead.
I haven't come across much of the variety of monkeys, which I was told that there were a large chunk of variety of monkeys. I'm talking about the real forest monkeys, not the human beings, those who are nomads or trimads. I'm just talking about serious monkeys, those who used to be had their houses around 4,500-5,000 meters height. I don't see any of those monkeys left. There are some red monkeys which have moved towards the city area side. They are not going back. A lot of tribal societies which have came out from the jungles in last 50 years, they were telling me that since the First World War was a cascading, damaging time for the forest jungles in a real meaning, because the oil guns were used, waste oil guns, and they were used to burn the forest so that they can show off the tribal society at that time during their wars to take over the land at various places. The monkeys have also passed out. So how much diversity of animals, or should I say species, from the jungle have lost, and how much can we still secure or reproduce further up if we have any gene pool of them besides gorilla?
There's any more questions? Yeah.
On the presentation, because I think because of the geopolitical and strategic locations, and because Darjeeling is not given its political recognition that it deserves, it's often glossed over in discussions over the Himalayas, or even when we use terminology such as the Northeast and things like that. So the fact that Darjeeling and Kalimpong came up today in a discussion, I think that's very important, because usually due to certain things that I'm not going into over here, but due to certain reasons, it's always glossed over. But whereas it's one of the places facing the most critical problems on a number of things, so I think it was very important. So they're doing a wonderful job. Yeah.
Thank you. Even I want to congratulate Dr. Rinan Shah for her fantastic initiative, and for the promise that it holds. For a engagement that comes from so many different sides about the region. So yeah, do we have any more questions, or shall I? Yes. So we have a question about what can be done. We have a question about disappearing species.
So my question is,
Yeah.
first of all, I want to congratulate for this wonderful initiative. So I want to ask you, like, how do you see, higher Himalayas? Because while reading some of the pieces, I also sort of foresee the kind of environmental damage that would probably happen in Ladakh region as well. So, I mean, how do you see yourself in terms of playing a preemptive role to avoid certain disasters, maybe incoming disasters in higher Himalayas, and are you planning to collaborate with any associations or institutes working in the higher Himalayas, let's say Spiti, Lahore, Ladakh, and these areas? Thank you.
Can you repeat the first part?
No, I mean, so basically, same thing. I mean, how do you see the reading Himalayas, which is currently focusing on Western Himalayas? So, learning from how do you see your role probably in kind of preempting ecological issues or any kind of issues, which is which the Ladakh or any other higher Himalayas might face. Yeah.
You want to take that? I'd like to mention here that my first kind of encounter actually as an adult with Buddhist thought was through Rachana Bookshop. And this wonderful collection of kind of illustrated graphic novels about the stories of the Buddha and stories of Buddhism. And I think that was, it was so easy to read, but so many layers of, but I think I think this is something that you brought up today in the type of work that you're doing as well, that it's so many layers and so many things that can come together in this kind of open-ended space that you are trying to create.
We're trying to.
Is that not working?
No.
Maybe perhaps use this one. Maybe.
Thank you, everybody, and Arkaja for putting that out. And Rachana also does a lot of work on translating some of the Nepali works into English, and which has also been looking at some of quote unquote the lost narratives around a lot of statewide agitation movements that used to happen. And there are a lot of people writing about it right now. In terms of what can be done, I feel in this lifetime I have I'm just content by thinking that even making a little bit of a difference is enough, because there are too many things that might come up which makes it really really difficult for us to see the end of something. But probably in a way like how we are engaging right now, this is also a space in which we are acknowledging the problem, that it exists, and probably we have been told 1,000 times that if we acknowledge a problem, that is the first step towards solving it. Secondly, probably understanding what creates the problem, and if we are able to lay out what creates the problem, helps us probably in solving 70 to 80% of the problem. And then, but here when we unpack the problem, there are too many ends to it that we need to fix before we can think of a solution. Yeah, that is one. And in terms of species, the Eastern Himalaya is considered, I think Suresh Babu sir would be able to explain this better, called the cradle of speciation, where a lot of species have come up and it still stays rich to this day. And if there has been any loss, I would not be able to answer the monkey question, that I wouldn't know anything about. But we have, there are different types of species that are present in the Eastern Himalaya, but I wouldn't be able to answer that question, sorry. Yeah, and for Stanzin, we are still thinking, and we just began recently, but we do see similarities in a lot of ways that we can, we can think of questions together. But one thing that comes to my mind is the book Caring for Glaciers, which is based in Ladakh, which speaks about caring for glaciers literally, and how it is important, how when we look at nature, because I feel what James Scott also mentioned about mountains is that you are more similar across altitudes than across the same altitude than you are similar across different altitudes within the same mountain. So I feel altitudinal collaboration would be an interesting idea to look at. And even in the book Caring for Glaciers, where the author mentions that whenever she asked about environment, when she asked about environmental changes, the question of the war and the question of militarization always came up. So by inherently that also became a topic that she had to engage with when she was talking about the simple thing as glaciers and people's interactions with glaciers. So I feel we have a lot more similarities that way, in terms of borders, in terms of access to resources, and mostly in terms of marginalization, because mountains are marginalized geographically in terms of how they're located, politically in terms of how decisions are made, environmentally because we are in a way located in one of the youngest and most fragile locations in the world, and also climatically vulnerable. So yeah, I mean, I feel we all should unite towards working against that. Thank you.
Thanks, thanks for that, Rinan. I think, I mean, we're ready to close. I think there's just, there was one thing that you said which really struck a chord with me, and I think it's the question that you ask about the high Himalayas, the question about what can be done, and lots of different kinds of concerns from lots of different regions. Is we get to know about the project when the bulldozers and trucks roll in, and that means that there has been a survey, there has been a pre-feasibility, there's been a feasibility report, there's been a tendering process. The contractor has made the designs, and then after that we are in the those designs have been approved, and then the materials are rolling in. That's when finally we get to know about the project. And I think this is really a problem of small governance units that don't have any say in the matter. So who do you protest to also? In all these places you end up you're writing letters to the chief minister. When I was in Dehradun over the summer, and there was a meeting about some tree cutting, some road widening scheme, some tree cutting and all that, and a group of activists had organized a meeting in a public park. And it was on a Sunday morning, and other people walking in the park came and joined the meeting also. One of those was even a municipal councillor, and he said, we also don't get to know about the project before it, the time when you get to know is when we get to know. And how do they get to know? When they see the survey numbers being written on the trees. That means because there's an active sort of social networks, WhatsApp groups, somebody says, oh, I saw this happening, they stop and they ask the guy who's numbering the trees. And that's the starting point of any kind of mobilization. And I think we really have to kind of question how that's even an acceptable a state of affairs. But you don't even know where to start having that conversation from. But anyway, that's a somewhat depressing note on which maybe we can end the session. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I, on behalf of Tibet House, would like to thank our chairperson, Ms. Arkaja Singh, and our distinguished speakers, Dr. Raman Kumarji and Dr. Rinan Shah. And your input on your respective fields is really amazing, and we truly appreciate it, and it means a lot. And thank you, everyone who joined today's conference. And I hope you all learned something from today's session. Thank you. So for the last session, I now request our chief guest, Joyaji, to kindly grace the stage with your presence. and present the souvenirs to our speakers and chairperson. Thank you. Our chairperson, Ms. Arkaja Singh ji. Second, to Dr. Rinan Shah ji. Okay, last but not the least, I now request our Secretary Kundyabla to kindly give a word of thanks. Thank you all.
So with this, we have reached the end of today's conference. On behalf of Tibet House New Delhi, I would like to thank Professor Siddiq Wahid, Mr. Claude Urpi, and all our distinguished speakers and chairpersons for accepting our invitation. Actually, Venerable Professor Kavila told me that some of the speakers have recently got back from their vacations, so I'm very grateful. I would also like to thank Venerable Professor Kavirila for convening this very conference and for all your support for all these years. And I'm really relieved that you got better from your flu in the last moment. And my sincere gratitude to Venerable Geshe Dojidamdullah, our director, for your constant guidance and for your constant guidance to all the staff, which have really enhanced our capabilities. And I would also like to thank my colleagues for all your hard work and efforts to putting all this together. So I wish to, just mention the names of my colleagues one by one, if I may. First of all, very obviously, Kumar Chundala, our program coordinator, and Kamat Sichula, Kamat Zumbala, La, and our IT staff at the back, Sri La, Tenzit Sedan La, Tenzit Rabyang La, and at the reception we have Tenzit Sambel La, Tamni Ongil La, and Mr. Ashok ji, Dalsang La, and our intern, Jaman Gelson La, and volunteer, Tenzit Ingsen La. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all the participants for your active participation in this conference. Tibet House regularly organizes such conferences and lectures. So if you wish to attend the future seminars or events, you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You can send us an email to pc@tibethouse.in, or you can, so on the website, there's also a link to subscribe. And you can also follow us on our Facebook account, Instagram and Twitter, or X, so it's now called X. So and also you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. And I would also like to announce the upcoming conference on 10th of August, a conference on Theravada and Mahayana, Series 4. And also the launch of the 5th batch of Nalanda Diploma course. The registration will start on 2nd September. Once again, I thank you all for your wonderful participation. Thank you. So I would like to request all the speakers, chairperson, and all the participants to please join us on the stage for a group photo. Please, everyone.